Education SSSC, the 21st of April 2025. Billy Edward Albert Meier, reproduction from April 1949.
With regard to education, it must be absolutely clear that no education can ever be given by parents, etc., nor can the character and behavior of human beings be brought about by the education of guardians, etc. Education is also not somehow related to the personality lived in the past, because the doctrine of reincarnation can and should never be taken into account in order to understand anything. It must therefore be completely clear that every thought, every form of character, behavior, attitude and action, etc., is neither inherited nor somehow predetermined, etc., because every newly born personality arises according to its own thoughts, behavior, and actions, and according to its own free will to form its own character. Every new personality, that is to say, every human being, forms itself accordingly, through its self-education, according to how and what it absorbs from its direct and indirect environment, and thus shapes and forms its thoughts, decisions, actions, and behavior. This makes it clear that it is always and in every case the absolutely personal self-education that determines everything and every thought, decision, action, and behavior, as well as the attitude and, if no illness prevents it, the reason and intellect of the human being, and what is developed in terms of character and behavior. Consequently, any education by parents or other guardians is pure fantasy, because it is absolutely impossible to educate a human being, as they educate themselves in every case and therefore shape their own character and behavior. This happens in every single case, and therefore with every human being equally, and it happens absolutely surely and inevitably in such a way that he or she, according to his or her own judgment and will, adopts the character and behavior of what he or she hears, sees, or experiences. In this way, he shapes himself through his thoughts, attitudes, actions, and behavior, etc., according to the various influences that affect him. These influences, which come from other people, etc., and are intended to have an educational effect, normal, coercive, frightening, or even violent, threatening or loving, etc., from parents or grandparents, as well as from other so-called guardians, acquaintances, friends, or foreigners, have the same effect on every human being in every individual case. They do so in such a way that they accept or reject them through their own judgment. That is to say, they fit into something that is ordered, simply presented or taught to them. Ultimately, however, it is the case that, through his own decision, he consolidates or rejects in himself, in terms of character and behavior, what is brought to him educationally in an indoctrinating, hearsay, fear-inspiring, neutral, normal, loving, threatening, or violent way. Depending on whether he accepts what he is taught or not, or whether he aligns his character and behavior accordingly, or rejects it, he shapes his self-education at his own discretion, over which an educator never has any influence whatsoever. This therefore means that every human being carries out self-education in his life according to what he perceives from the outside through his hearing and all his senses of perception, whereby everything that arises outside him serves as a model if he aligns all his senses accordingly, whereby he forms his character and behavior in a self-educational way. This is precisely the case when self-education is indoctrinated according to a role model in terms of character and also behavior, and is sustainably formed according to what emerges from the role model. However, if this role model self-education does not materialize, but is effectively rejected, then human beings carry out a form and wise individual self-education that is chosen either positively or negatively, depending on how the human being consciously builds up his or her attitude and behavior. Every self-education by example, whatever its nature, as well as self-education in the positive or negative sense, entails that the human being has a certain character and develops a format that determines his mind and his disposition, as it determines his entire character, his nature or disposition, and the nature of his personality, as well as his temperament and disposition, his nature or essence and nature, or his overall profile. The influences of other people, their ways of thinking, actions and behavior, etc., are factors that absolutely influence and shape, or not, the thinking, dispositions and forms of decision-making, actions, character formation, desires and behavior of the developing human being. And this happens according to what he accepts or rejects for himself. It is therefore determined by whether he allows himself to be influenced by what is brought to him from the outside, and whether he evaluates this positively or negatively in a self-educational way, and uses it to determine and shape his character, his behavior and his attitude, etc., either positively or negatively, towards what is just or unjust, normal or degenerate, positive or negative. It is therefore never the upbringing of parents, grandparents or other guardians, etc., but always and in every case, if it is not a disease or pathological Ausstattung, always absolutely the self-education of the human being himself, regardless of how he also degenerates or degenerates. All other scientific and psychological explanations relating to education by parents or any other human beings are and remain only nonsensical assertions, as they could not be more ignorant and lowly intelligent, as Farth explains. The human being as such should form himself into a true human being in every form and wise, and develop effective integrity in his consciousness in order to be able to live and act in such a way that he can express himself personally with all the standards of his values through his behavior. Developing personal integrity against everything negative is to be understood as loyalty to oneself and to one's own righteousness, whereby the human being with integrity lives honestly in his consciousness and acts in such a way that he is always able to express his standards and values honestly in all his personal correct thoughts in all his life, behavior, conduct, and actions. This characterizes absolute personal integrity, which, as loyalty to oneself, proves that absolute integrity and incorruptibility apply to him. Furthermore, integrity also stands for the decency and honesty of human beings, as well as for their righteousness, trustworthiness, absolute reliability, and profound trust. And these are values of true and effective humanity, whose high values also mean true love, peace, and freedom, which must be cherished and nurtured. Effective true humanity should be learnt from the very beginning, from early childhood onwards, and it should be explained to the child, girl or boy, at an early age, and repeatedly from time to time, that they themselves should orientate and develop their world of thoughts, feelings and emotions according to their own good and valuable interests, in order to make them their own element of character and behavior. Unfortunately, however, this is not done in this way by earth humans, but rather in the opposite way, in that parents, grandparents, and other guardians disregard this and educate their children, contrary to the necessity for them to educate themselves as a result of their very own interest in what is right, in order to become true human beings, and reject everything that brings violence, discord, unrighteousness, and negative character. Parents and other so-called guardians therefore do not do what is correct, but instead show their children all kinds of evil, violence, lies and deceit in matters of religion and life, etc., as well as evil falsehood, discord, strife, hatred, revenge, greed, retaliation, and avarice, so that the child is confronted with all these falsehoods by watching and listening to them, and everything is self-educated by the child, and stored and molded as unworthy. In this way, human beings are molded from an early age with all the good and wrong things that their guardians exemplify to them, instead of being made aware of their self-education with the necessary instructions and explanations, so that they can teach themselves correctly and well in this respect, and consequently use their good and right character traits in the course of their lives, namely good and positive, but not evil and degenerate. Consequently, everything that leads to murder and manslaughter can be prevented through correct and positive self-education, especially when military conflicts take place and war is announced, where murder and destruction are then carried out without hesitation and without restraint. However, if parents and other guardians, and of course also foreigners, did not set an example of all that is wrong and good and incorrect, then the correct and positive self-education could take effect through positive instructions and explanations and, in good form, make the growing child and the human being becoming an adult into a true human being. However, this would also require the abolition of murderous armies, which only bring discord, death, destruction, annihilation, and misery to Earth and Earth humans, but never peace, love, positivity, and justice. The lies of the military fanatics that a defense army is needed are based only on fear, cowardice, greed for land, vindictiveness, lies and deceit, military fanaticism and lust for power, but never on creating and maintaining true peace, as is wildly lied about and fraudulently instilled in children, causing them to be morbidly and stupidly frightened at a young age of development. But if we look at the education of human beings by parents and other guardians, then the truth is this. The truth is that human beings often have to learn a great deal of good, positive, and correct behavior during their lives, if they learn it at all, because the harsh realities of life demand it. Namely, that everything negative must be rethought, and a change towards the positive must take place, especially towards honest and true humanity. True humanity harbors extremely valuable qualities that are expressed when a person understands another person and empathizes with what is going on inside them and what moves them. In particular, these values are firstly mindfulness and empathy, which must always be characterized by respect and tolerance. Furthermore, another human being must also be shown honest respect, consideration and care, because these really are the absolute core values of what constitutes true human being, which, like true and profound love, true peace and effective freedom, must be cherished and nurtured in all honesty and strength of character. When the term true and genuine humanity is used, it is of course also associated with humanity, as it also has a broader and narrower meaning, namely that in the whole of true humanity and humanity towards fellow human beings, everything that belongs to or is proper to human beings and relates to them is respected. In this respect, these are all high values that distinguish human beings from animals, creatures, and all other life forms, which also define the true human being's attitude and disposition, as well as human faults and weaknesses. Unfortunately, this is also linked to the fact that human beings as such make mistakes, because it is said that to err is human, but this does not and must never mean that they behave and think inhumanly and also act wrongly in this way. All these values mentioned, as well as many other behavioral values, are the practical themes of the Nalkademian teaching, which is the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, which should be learned by human beings on earth, and they should concern themselves with it, and thereby allow themselves to grow within themselves in order to become true human beings. In this respect, human beings should become true human beings and cultivate their true humanity, just as in this way they should also appreciate and honor creation in the existence of all its energy and power of nature and its fauna and flora, everything that exists in creation and its endless existence.